This is Charlie's town, a town much like any other. This is where Charlie lives. No child is ordinary, but Charlie liked ordinary things. The park with its swings and trees to climb, the swimming pool where his mum taught him to swim, and the big school field where he'd pretend to go on adventures with his friends at playtime. But best of all, Charlie loved the docks down by the river. People said the docks were ugly and dirty, and they smelt of old rotten fish, but Charlie loved them. Down by the docks there were ships that were old and tired, rusty and leaking, and new ships flying flags from countries Charlie had never seen. Charlie wondered where these boats had been and where they would go next. Down by the docks there were always things to see. The docks was where they made oil rigs, steel giants with spider legs as big as a tower block. But most of all, Charlie loved the docks because that's where his granddad lived. Every Sunday, Charlie would go and visit Grandad while his mum went to work. She would take him by the hand and walk through the town before anyone else was awake, down past the oil rigs and the still closed shops to Grandad's house. His house was very small, and like Grandad, it was very, very old. It stood between the factories that made things for the oil rigs, buildings that banged and crashed all day long, but not on a Sunday. Charlie's mum would knock on the door with a big bang. She said Grandad couldn't hear so well these days, but Charlie knew he could. Through the window, the glass all bubbly, Charlie would see Grandad coming to the door. Slowly at first, his bones all stiff, but then faster, opening it with a big smile and a hug for both of them. Charlie's mum was always in a hurry, but she'd kiss Charlie and tell him to be good, even though he always was, and rush off to work. "Come in, Charlie, let's get the kettle on," Grandad would say. Charlie didn't like tea, but he drank it with his Grandad. Charlie loved his Grandad. What Charlie liked best was that his Grandad talked to Charlie like he was a grown-up. He would boil that kettle and then say, "Pour us a cup, will you, Charlie?" Charlie knew his mum would never let him do this at home. After all, hot water is dangerous. But Charlie's Grandad would always say, "Just as long as you remember that it's very hot, you'll be okay. I'll watch you." Charlie's Grandad was the most interesting person Charlie knew. When he was little, there were no things like computers or video games, and they didn't even have a television. He once told Charlie that his mum and dad were so poor they only had 2 chairs in their house, and at tea time, Charlie's Grandad had to stand next to the table. Charlie thought how lucky he was, and thought that this was why Grandad had the most comfortable chair to sit on. After they'd made the tea, Grandad would take down the metal box of biscuits and let Charlie pick one. "Only one." Then he would say, "Let's go down to the shed, Charlie." This was the place that Charlie loved most. Grandad had lots of stories. So many that he couldn't remember them without something to remind him, and his shed was where all his memories lived. Grandad would open the door with an old rusty key, and then they would peer inside at his memories. Boxes full of uniforms, boots, nets, pieces of paper and wood, ropes and tools, everyone a memory and a story. Walking inside, Charlie would close his eyes and reach out and pick an object. Then, sitting down on a box, Grandad would try and remember why it was so special. Sometimes Charlie picked the same thing twice, but Grandad always remembered something new. This time, Charlie closed his eyes and reached out and touched a small bundle of string. To you or me, a length of string wouldn't be very special, But Charlie knew that everything in Grandad's shed was magical. Charlie brought the string back to Grandad, who would sit up and, putting on his glasses, have a look at what Charlie had found. "Let's see what you found, Charlie," he'd always say. "Ah, I remember now." And so the story would begin. "Did you know I used to be a fireman, Charlie? Yes, a fireman with a yellow helmet and a smart wool uniform. People think it must be fun riding in a fire engine. And it is. But you know what, Charlie? When you're sitting in a racing fire engine, you know you're going to fight a fire, and fire is the most dangerous thing there is." Now this string is no ordinary string. It's special fireman string. You see, Charlie, in a fire there's lots of smoke. In fact, it's the smoke that hurts you most often, not the fire. You can't breathe, you see. It burns your throat. That's why you should always remind your mum to check the fire alarms in your house. One day, not far from here, there used to be a firework factory. People said it was one of the biggest, making all kinds of rockets and bangers all year round. All the fireworks were kept in a giant shed with buckets of water and sand everywhere in case anyone saw a fire. People in the firework factory were very scared of fire, as you can imagine. There were so many fireworks that if they all exploded at once, they would have been heard for 100 miles. The big firework shed had big iron doors that creaked and groaned when they were opened, and were meant to keep the fireworks safe. But the doors were very old, and one day the hinges snapped and had to be mended. Along came a welder to do the job. His torch was very hot, but they thought he'd be okay. He was outside. But as he cut away, the door got hotter and hotter, and soon sparks began to spring inside the door, and very quickly they started to jump into the boxes of fireworks. Imagine that, Charlie. Charlie thought for a moment. All of a sudden, there was a loud bang and the welder stopped. In fact, everyone stopped in the factory. In fact, everyone stopped all around the factory. People putting out their washing, milkmen, dogs and cats. And then the factory blew up. Grandad reached out and shook Charlie by the shoulders. Imagine it, Charlie. Years' worth of fireworks exploding. The noise was so loud it made you deaf. Well, we were sitting drinking tea, and you know what, Charlie? No one had to ring 999 that day. Oh no, we heard the bang. The windows shook, the table shook, and our tea spilt. We all knew it was the firework factory. Quick as a flash, we were speeding down the road, all the while watching the smoke and the fireworks firing into the sky. Everyone was running away. All the windows were broken. We thought that any second the whole place would blow to smithereens. Were you scared, Grandad? Asked Charlie. Too right. I was petrified. But there's nothing wrong with being scared, Charlie. It's what keeps you safe. Like pouring the tea just now. If you're not scared about burning yourself, you probably will. Anyway, I was a fireman, and I had to go and see if everyone had escaped from the fire. When we got there, it was mad bedlam. The sound of the explosions, the smoke. The factory owner was standing there with just his pants on. The rest of his clothes had blown off. He said that everyone was okay apart from the welder who'd gone to mend the door. I said I'd go and find him, but the owner said the rest of the fireworks could explode at any moment, and with that he ran off down the street in his pants. Why didn't you just run away, Grandad? Asked Charlie. Sometimes you have to be brave, Charlie. even when every inch of you wants to run away. So what did you do, Grandad? Well, there was smoke everywhere, and you couldn't see a thing. We put on our yellow breather apparatus and masks so we could go in the smoke, and 2 of us set off to find the welder. What about the string, Grandad? Well, Charlie, when you go into the smoke, you can easily get lost and never find your way back. You only have a little bit of air in your tanks, and when it runs out, you will probably die. So what we did was take this special string and tie it to the fire engine, and very slowly uncoiled it as we went into the factory. Like Hansel and Gretel with the bread? Yes. Only the good thing about string is that birds don't eat it up, Charlie. We inched forward, bangs and crashes, fires and smoke everywhere, feeling for the welder. The string was nearly all gone when suddenly I banged into something hard. A big metal door that was hanging on its hinges, and underneath was the welder, all his skin black with smoke, but still alive. So you saved him, Grandad? Not yet. You see, all of a sudden, we began to hear a cracking and popping inside the shed. The rest of the fireworks were about to blow. I picked up the man and put him over my shoulder, and turning around, began winding in string. My mate by my side helping me. You know what, Charlie? You've never seen 2 men walk so fast. Every step putting us further and further from the fireworks, until, with a bump, we banged into the fire engine, and my mates bundled us in, and off we drove. Then the firework factory blew up. Wow, said Charlie. Yes, if it hadn't been for this little piece of string, we'd never have found our way back. And you know what, Charlie? If I'd died that day, your mum would never have been born, and neither would you. Charlie thought about this for a moment. Yes, Charlie, we all owe this little ball of string a lot. It saved all our lives that day. Charlie looked at the string, then at his Grandad, who smiled and winked at him. Pop it back in the shed, Charlie, said Grandad. Let's go for a walk. With that, Charlie opened the door and carefully placed the string back where he'd found it, and wondered what other stories his Grandad would tell him next time. Charlie closed the door. That night, Charlie went to a bonfire in the park with his mum, Grandad, and his friend Toby. Charlie thought about Grandad's story as he looked at the huge burning mountain of old wood, the ragged guy perched on top. The fire was blazing, the flames licking up into the night, the sparks singing up into the stars, adding extra sparkle to Orion's belt. There were lots and lots of people all round the fire and stretching up the hill behind him. Although it was hot and dangerous, the crowd pushed closer to the fire. People seemed hypnotized by the flames. Charlie wanted a better view of the fire, but he could already feel its heat on his face. Let's get closer, urged Toby. Charlie wasn't sure what to do, but he remembered the fireman in the story. Fire's really dangerous, said Charlie. Let's stop and think for a moment. Charlie wanted to see the fire. What dangers could he have spotted? What choices could he have made? What would you choose? Mum, can we stand on that little hill where we're safe and can see the fire better? Smart thinking, said Toby. From the top of the little hill, Charlie and Toby felt like generals watching the battle below. On top of the fire, Charlie could see the guy outlined in black against the flames. He remembered the welder in Grandad's story. Mum, can we go down now near the bonfire to watch the fireworks? Yes, if we're careful, she said. Let's pause again and think about this. Charlie wanted to move closer to the fire and to see the fireworks. What dangers could Charlie have spotted? What choices could Charlie make? Which would you choose? What would you do? Now, by the dying fire, the remains of the guy, the scorched grass and the charred timbers, they could still feel the heat and the smoke still blew in their eyes, but they gasped as the first rockets roared into the sky and exploded with a crash and a burst of tiny stars. Wave after wave of sizzling colour from the fireworks blazed into the sky. But even experts can get things wrong, and Charlie could see one of the closest fireworks had failed to light. He wanted to go and look at it more closely, but remembered the picture of the fireworks factory manager running down the street in his pants. Let's again think about this. Charlie wanted to pick up the firework. What were the dangers? What were his choices? What would you do? Charlie told his granddad about the firework. Just as well we leave it to the experts, he replied. On the way home, Charlie walked between his mum and his granddad. That was great, he said. He'd liked the huge fire and the sparks and the colours. He'd liked the guy perched on top of the fire. He'd liked the fireworks blasting into the night sky with their noise and sudden colour. But most of all, he liked being with his friends and his mum and granddad.